Hi, everyone. Are you going
I'm
to
not
say
saying nothing
hello?
because you just said, oh yeah, hello.
I had to threaten him just now, just FYI.
Okay.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
This is going to be part 2 of Hunger and Thirst. So it would be wise for you to watch the part 1 of Hunger and Thirst. This is the third Beatitude that Dave is preaching on here. This is preaching. Fourth? Oh, I swear.
You shouldn't swear.
I know.
Especially that's what you were telling me about.
I know. Hey, that wasn't
Anyway.
recorded.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Hunger and Thirst, part 2. We did not record last Wednesday. Dave was in jail. I had to bail him out.
That's right.
But so we thought we would do what we haven't done before, which is release 2 episodes all at once. So you saw part 1 and now is part 2. And we're going to take another spin on hunger and thirst and the promise that comes after we hunger and thirst, and how and what are we hungering for. So Dave, you ready to kick us off?
Yeah. Part of what I liked about this was that, and asked you on it if we could do too, is that there's 2 different ways to look at this, and they don't contradict each other, but they do kind of take it in different directions. And if you, the people who are listening, listen to the first one, I mean, if it held together. I mean, I really like how the hungering and thirsting for, what the question was, we all hunger, we all thirst. So what is the thing you use to feed the hunger of your soul, not just physically, but spiritually, to quench the thirst, and that we all eat different things, and blah, 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 blah. And but we followed it through Paul's conversion and righteousness that's not established by my rightly doing everything. It's the proper use of the law that makes you aware of your sin and that you can't change your sin, and makes you desperate for Christ. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for a kind of righteousness that they themselves cannot produce. They get satisfied because they become desperate for grace. There's the gospel. Okay. And it's all there, and this does not contradict that, but there is a different spin on it. There's a different direction. And I think a good place to start with this one, again, acknowledging that hunger, unlike the other Beatitudes, is something that resonates. Blessed are the mourning, blessed are the poor. We're gonna go, what? But a hunger generally speaks to, forget the biology thing. We speak to someone who's strongly motivated. They have a strong desire, single-minded ambition. A hungry team in the athletic arena is a team that's willing to do whatever it takes because they're hungry. Okay. But the first thing I want us to notice this time, as we move back into the text, is that the blessing of this beatitude is pronounced upon, and the promise of satisfaction is promised to hungry people. So it's like the promise is for people who actually stay hungry. So it's a promise that's pronounced upon actually unfulfilled aspiration. Blessed are those who are hungry, are presently, continually hungry and thirsty. It doesn't say blessed are those who are righteous, or who think they're righteous. Those people are self-righteous, and that is what we talked about last time. Because what satisfies isn't righteousness, the way we're spinning it this time. What satisfies is this perpetual hunger for what is right and what is good, this unquenchable thirst for what is righteous, for what is right, for what is good. I'm kind of giving a real broad definition of it, but let me illustrate that kind of hunger, that perpetual hunger within which there is kind of a satisfaction. It's Philippians 3. And we talked about Paul in Philippians 3 last time, and we talked about all the things that he fed himself with, the religious, I'm a circumcised the 8th day, Hebrew of Hebrews, those are all things he ate. And then his conversion was, that was all dust, and he came up with this hunger for a righteousness that came not through his performing of the law, but through faith in Christ. But right after that, he declares the greatest passion of his life. Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, he says this, that I may know him, this is my passion, that I may be found in him, and not in a righteousness of my own, but that I may be found in him, and that I may be just like him. And the be just like him is taken from where he says that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. I want to experience the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, the things he suffered, I want to suffer, and being conformed even to the image of his death. I love that verse, not because the death part, but I love how I interpreted it, because I remember he's not saying, when he says, I want to be conformed to the image of his death, he's not saying, I want to die on a cross the way Jesus died. That's not what he was saying. That would be weird. What he was saying was, I think in the whole thing is I wanted to live the way he lived, and I wanted to die the way he died, not meaning on a cross, but if you go through the cross and what happened, he died forgiving, he died loving, he died giving, he died serving, and I want to live that way. I want to live the way he died. Anyway, that's Paul's passion. Okay, that's what he wants. Right after he declares what he wants, that's what he's hungry for, he says this, not that I've arrived, nor have I obtained it, but I do this, I do press on to the upward call of God in Christ, that I may lay hold of that which has laid hold of me. And those are passionate words, that I may, God's grace grabbed me, and now I'm grabbing it. And so I'm going to spend the rest of my life pressing on toward the upward call of God. Those are the words of a hungry person, okay? And so it's almost like to stay that hungry is how you grow. To stay that hungry is how Paul would maybe be satisfied and actually begin to experience over the course of his life what it does mean to live the way he died and be found in him and all those other things. So blessed are those who stay hungry and thirsty for what? For righteousness. Okay, in a broad sense, staying hungry and thirsty for what is right. What kind of righteousness? Not self-righteousness. We've already talked about that, because the Pharisees, I'm beating this one to death. The Pharisees had reduced righteousness to self-serving shows. Like I could reduce righteousness to something you could see, like how often I went to church, the ceremonial washing. So ultimately, their definition of righteousness was how they looked on the outside, and they only appeared to be righteous. In Matthew 23, Jesus says to them, you guys are really good with this. You tithe dill and mint and cumin. Great. Okay, that's in the law. You should be giving your tithe and dill and mint and cumin, but you neglect the weightier matters of the law, the things that really are right and good and make a difference, like justice, mercy, faithfulness. You polish the outside of the cup and of the bowl, but inwardly you're full of robbery and self-indulgence. And it's why the prophets, all over the place, this one is Isaiah, says to the people of God, I hate your solemn assemblies. You've reduced your righteousness to solemn assemblies. How well you sing, how good the sermon is. I hate your solemn assemblies and your appointed festivals. This is God talking through the prophet. They are a burden to me. You think people don't like to go to church? God says, I don't like going to church. Okay, I love that. You spread your hands in prayer. I do not see. You multiply your prayers. Oh God, oh God, oh God, I do not hear. What would change that? Well, learn to do good. Learn to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Let's get practical. Reprove the ruthless. Don't turn a blind eye to the ruthless. Defend the orphan, feed the widow. So the point of when we're talking about righteousness here is it's not just moral virtue, though it would include that. But so often Pharisees and religious systems, virtue, it's kind of distilled down to all the naughty things you don't do. The Greek word here actually is dikiasune, something like that. Look it up.
Google it. I don't know.
Dikiasune. It means righteous, but the word that actually pops up relative to it's right, it's righteous, it's moral virtue, but also justice comes up. And it's not just judicial justice, right, wrong, but there's this wonderful word that gets connected to it. It's restorative justice. Land on the word restorative. So things get restored. It's a desire, hunger and thirst for things to be made right, even socially. Tikkun olam is a word that open door people are familiar with. We've talked about that. I think it's a Hebrew word, but I know what it means is the healing of the world. And the Old Testament prophets, there was this desire that and it was connected to shalom. Shalom, the way things ought to be. Shalom was not just peace. Shalom was wholeness.
Yes.
So when you have shalom in a home, that rhymes. When you have shalom in a home, you have peace, because that's what we think the word means, because it does mean that. But you have peace because it's whole. There's wholeness. The people are, and so all of a sudden we're getting closer to, like, blessed are those who have an unending hunger for, an insatiable thirst for shalom in their home, restorative justice, for things that are wrong to be made right, and they just can't quit until we press through these hard issues, hunger for how things ought to be. So restorative justice, the key words are it restores. Restorative justice, another word would be redeems. It reclaims. What is wrong is made right. So blessed are those who hunger and thirst for making what's wrong right. What's far, near. Blessed are those who have an incurable hunger. They just are constantly hungry for things that are far off to be brought near, for people who have been excluded to be included, for people who have been left out to be brought in. That's a general kind of taste of restorative justice, which is diakosune. And some of it doesn't start with the message of Jesus, but it's kind of declared in Luke chapter 4 when Jesus finally does declare the mission that he's on. It's very consistent with this, and I think we're all familiar with it. It's when he goes to Nazareth, opens the scroll, and reads the prophet Isaiah. And then he's speaking of himself, where he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And the way you're going to know that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and has anointed me is that he's anointed me to preach, first of all, good news to the poor, to preach and proclaim release to the captives, to provide sight to the blind eyes, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, which is kind of a way to say to just bring forgiveness. The debt has been paid, kind of thing, all of which brings people who are far off near, who've been excluded, they're included. So blessed are those who have an abiding hunger and unquenchable thirst to make his mission their mission. Like all of a sudden you hear good news for the poor. Do I have a hunger and thirst to be a person who's good news for the poor, who is releasing captives and helping blind people to see? Glenn Statton, in his book on Beatitudes, says it this way. This is a quote. Blessed are those who yearn bodily for the kind of restorative justice that brings powerless, outcast, unclean, and untouchable back to their place in the covenant community, where they'll be welcomed at the table so they can eat and drink, and by that, literally come back to life. So there's a redemptive piece to that, but I think you get the whole thing. More familiar language when I talk that way, again, more familiar language to me because I'm, a church geek.
You are, for sure.
Yeah, I know. That righteousness is manifested as restorative justice when those who are far off are brought near, when those who are outside are brought inside, when those who are excluded get included, and not just by God, but by us. Like I'm inviting them to my table. And now I come to Ephesians Chapter 2. Okay, and this is really one of the Pauline bedrock texts for this concept, where he says this. He's speaking to us, I think, but he's actually speaking to the Ephesians, and he's saying, remember your own story. Remember that we were the separate ones, that we at one time were separate from Christ. We were excluded from the commonwealth strangers to the covenant, having no hope and without God in the world. But now, you who were far off, because this is our story. Now we're being nice to other people. Wait. This is where you started too. You who were far off have been brought near. We who were outside have been brought inside. All of us who were excluded are now included by the blood of Christ. And then he says into this, blessed are those who have an insatiable hunger and an unquenchable thirst to bring people who are far near, to bring people who have been pushed outside, inside, excluded, included, to make what is wrong in the church, in the family, in the culture, in the society. Blessed are those who can't go to bed at night because they want to see what's wrong be made right. And the satisfaction comes in the perpetual hunger for this, not necessarily in the fulfillment of it, though that's, perpetually being hungry and thirsty for what is right and good, and bringing the far near ultimately would bring some profound satisfaction. I think the best illustration of this, and it kind of seals the deal for most of us, I think, is this hunger and thirst. And quite frankly, doesn't mean that nobody's ever said it, but I've never heard anybody say it like this, that this hunger and thirst for this kind of righteousness is what sent Jesus to the cross, because he was hungry and thirsty this way. Think about Jesus. He had an insatiable hunger from the beginning of time, before he left heaven's throne and became a man, a human, a slave, obedient even unto death. Why did he do that? Here's why. He had an insatiable hunger, an unquenchable thirst for things that were far off to be brought near, things that were outside to be brought inside, people who were now excluded to be included. And he hungered for that so much he would go that's how far he would go to bring that kind of restorative justice, righteousness to you, to me, in some very practical ways. That's why he touched the leper. Why? He had unquenchable thirst for people who were untouchable to be touched. It's just his way. He had this insatiable hunger to see people who'd been excluded included. That's why he healed the guy with the withered hand, and he did it on the Sabbath, knowing he would get in trouble because he did it on the Sabbath, because he had this insatiable hunger for those who were far off to be brought near, who'd been excluded to be included, for those who were out to be brought in. When he cleansed the temple, I can end on this one. Cleansing the temple, I mean, this could stir up some good conversation, and we don't have time to get into it here. But his cleansing the temple, that we talked about it last time, but we're talking a lot in the culture today about systemic racism, systemic things. Well, the temple was a system. It was systemically excluding people. It was systematically keeping people who wanted to come in far away on the outside. And so part of why he cleansed the temple was because he had an insatiable hunger, an unquenchable thirst for blind people to see. Remember the poor and the lame, they came to him and he healed them all. He had an unquenchable thirst for those who were far off to be brought near, to have access to the Father, to have access to him. And it just feels like we're onto something. It is very much at the core of the mission of God, the mission of Christ, the gospel that we preach. But the key is to stay hungry. And I would end where we left off last time. A story I told of the group of us who for several years in a row were fortunate enough to go out to California and meet with Dallas Willard. And there were a couple of other churches that joined us, a group of maybe 25 pastors and people like that. Just sitting around a table for 3 days with Dallas, and we talked to many things. Excuse me. Sorry. But in the course of the conversation, one of the things that came up was we talk about men and women in ministry who fall, because we're all concerned about that ourselves. And why do they do that? And what happens? And why do they do that? And what he said that fits into this was, among other things, that he said, I think they just lose their appetite. They're not hungry anymore. And he even talked about how sometimes they get bored, and bored people are dangerous. I mean, and but you lose your appetite. And we talked earlier on, again, I'll throw it out to you again, like what would make someone lose their appetite if they'd been hungry for people far off to be brought near, to people who were sinners and publicans who were excluded to be included? I mean, literally included, like at our table. How could you lose your appetite for that? Well, I think the answer, do you want to respond to that?
Do I what?
Did you want to respond to that?
Yeah.
Okay, go. Why would we lose our appetite for that?
Because there's so many other things that are easily accessible in our culture right now.
Yep.
It's the Burger King, what we were talking about before.
Oh.
You can have it your way. If I can have it my way at Target, if I can have it my way at the house I'm living in, if I can have it my way with the car I want to buy, with my marriage, with the easy way to get in and out of everywhere you want to go, why would I take the hard road?
Right. Well, and I do think that is how we lose our appetite, because it gets hard. I think if you really are hungry for people far off to be brought near, and literally to your table, it gets messy. I mean, in a church, there's a real evangelistic energy around this talk.
Yeah.
To be hungering and thirsting, like looking around as a people who is far off, and if they were invited, they would come close, not just to us, but to God, but to us as well. Who looks excluded? Let's go find them and bring them to, well, they might not fit in, but if they're at your table, you bring more and more people like that into your table, it's going to get messy.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it gets messy is what can make us lose our appetite for this kind of hunger. And that's why the perpetual hunger is where the satisfaction comes, to never lose your hunger. I mean, we talked about it last time too, a team that wins a Super Bowl, and now, we got it. They're not hungry the next year. Well, maybe they might be, but they got to find it. But the key is in staying hungry. And another reason, I'm just repeating last time now, but another reason we lose our appetite for this kind of righteousness, hungering and thirsting to make things right, is because it's messy. The other is that we're just full, using the biological metaphor again of eating. If you eat enough, you're full. And in Revelation, it talks about people who are rich, increased with goods, and in need of nothing. So I'm not hungry anymore for anything. And so anyway, stuff like that.
I love the idea, and you've kind of alluded to it a little bit in what you've said here today, but the idea that we spend so much of our time as Christians, as modern Christians, seeking after righteousness. And I don't know if you would consider that. Yes, moral virtue. Yeah, right. And it looking like we're righteous, or it looking like we have good moral virtue. And especially in our social culture right now, it sways all over the place. And unless you are on the latest platform and agreeing with all the voices, you don't fall in line properly.
Right.
At least that's what the world wants to tell you. And I love what you're saying here, is that it's not about seeking after righteousness. It's about your hunger and thirst for what is right, which there is a difference there, correct? Yeah, there's a difference there. And
it includes just, I don't want to lose the moral virtue thing.
Right.
But I think caring for those who are far off to be brought near has moral virtue. It just expands it. I think the paradigm that I always try to keep in my head, and that's the easiest place to go, it's the most obvious, was that the way the Pharisees reduced righteousness, they didn't expand it. They reduced it down to what we would call today churchy things. How many times you go to church? Is there something wrong with that? No. But these external things that anybody could do just by, washing their hands a certain way, saying a certain creed, singing a song a certain way, none of it's wrong. None of it is making things that are wrong right.
Yes.
And the other thing is that the kind of repentance that we need to engage in to get to this kind of righteousness never takes place in the church. It's not by going forward, it's by going out the doors and with a hunger for the things that are wrong to be made right. The far brought near, blah blah blah.
Yep.
So
yep. Yeah, I feel like in our day and age, you can call it like, are you really inviting people to your table to have dinner, or are you just changing your Facebook status? Are you sharing your favorite article?
Oh, that's your outreach, yeah.
Yeah, or are you really are you really inviting those people to your literal table, or your psychological table, or your spiritual table?
Well, yeah. See, that would be a whole different
Right.
topic. I mean, the whole social media thing where we call each other friends, and you don't have a friend in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see bees, really bees, and they're pollinating all these little flowers. You don't know. It's like you don't know any one of those flowers.
Yeah.
I just lost a metaphor with that.
Yeah, you did.
No. But I know people like that. They just pollinate.
Yeah.
They don't know anybody. They know everybody.
Right.
And that's the social media, that whole thing about FOMO, fear of missing out. Oh my God. Yeah, whatever. That'd be a good spiritual discipline. Yeah, get off of social media for a month, a day. I did it. No one likes you. Yeah, you will find out no one does like you.
Actually, no one does.
That's right. Deal with it. Anyway.
I don't know how to close this up now. It's
my
own fault.
We lost our way. Yeah, it is your fault because you didn't press the record stop thing.
I really enjoyed, especially these last two episodes. Again, you already said it. Oh, my dog's crying in the background. You already said it. It's so easily identifiable physically, but then when we take this to a spiritual level, what Jesus is telling us to do or not do, and the bar that he is calling us to, it challenges me across all the areas of my life. It challenges me in my workplace, what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, what I'm thinking about, what I'm not thinking about, the way that I'm raising my kids, the way that I'm engaging in my marriage, or not.
Yep.
And none of those things I can say on here, because I'm gonna have to talk to my counselor about that.
Well, yeah, and that's why I think the real powerful metaphor here is, honestly, I can feel it in my gut.
Yeah.
The whole thing of, can you stay hungry?
Yeah.
Because I listed a few reasons why we're full, or why we lose our appetite. And one reason you lose your appetite is that you cared and you cared and you cared and you try, and it doesn't feel like it's doing any good. And so there really comes a fatigue. I'm not gonna keep trying to pull in and reconcile. I don't see, then you just get tired. And when a group of guys or men and women are with Dallas Willard, they're wondering about falling and then losing your appetite, what it touches is fatigue. And I do think that one, anyway, that's why you got to end with there's a sower who went out to sow, which means he gave what he had to give. And then he went to sleep, which means he thought maybe what he gave didn't matter. And then he woke up and it grew, and who knew, and just keep sowing. Just keep giving what God gave you to give, and then go to sleep. In this place, the sleeping is a healthy kind of forgetfulness that goes, I don't know, I hope it did some good, but it does do good. Anyway, so stay hungry and stay thirsty. And
amen.
That's all I got for today. If you get me going on another direction, it's going to be...
I know. I already have another thing we could talk about.
These are like about 3 different topics.
I know. Maybe we'll do another episode. We'll see.
Yeah. Of this?
I don't know. I got so many ideas. Okay, fine. He wants to move on. What's number 5? I already forgot.
It's either mercy or pure in heart. I love the pure in heart one. Mercy's good too. Maybe we'll touch on mercy. I mean, maybe it's worth the whole thing.
Oh, my dog won't shut up. So it's time to end. Thank you everyone for joining us again. That's really fun to do 2 episodes at once and just blast them out there. Interact with us in the comments below. Also feel free to follow Dave on YouTube.
Yes, I'm on YouTube.
Yeah, super popular.
Right under a guy, get past Dave Johnson, the football player. That actually is me, but I'm wearing a costume. But this is the other Dave Johnson that talks about stuff.
Bye.
Bye.